The champagne glass caught the light from the chandelier above, and when my son's boss lifted it toward me in a mock toast, smiling that polished smile of his, I reached into my bag and set a manila folder on the white tablecloth in front of him. I watched his eyes drop to it. I watched the color leave his face the way water drains from a bathtub, slowly at first, then all at once. There were 140 people in that banquet hall, and every single one of them saw what happened next. But I should start at the beginning. That's where the real story lives. My husband's name was Thomas. He had wide hands, the kind that looked like they were made for carrying things, and he laughed too loud at his own jokes, and he smelled like sawdust and Irish Spring every evening when he came through our front door. We had been married 11 years when the scaffolding collapsed at the Devereaux construction site on Route 9 outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Thomas was 41 years old. My son was 9. My daughter was 6. The company's insurance carrier was a firm called Meridian Coverage Solutions. Their regional director at the time was a man named Gerald Ashworth. He was 44 years old then, fit, silver-haired, even in middle age, the kind of man who looked like he had been designed by a committee to appear trustworthy. He wore monogrammed cufflinks. I remember the cufflinks because I stared at them for the entire 45 minutes he sat across from me in my kitchen 3 weeks after I buried my husband, explaining, in a voice that was somehow both gentle and immovable, why Thomas's death did not qualify for full wrongful death benefits. The preliminary investigation suggests your husband was not wearing his harness correctly at the time of the incident, he said. That constitutes a safety violation on the part of the employee. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Mrs. Calloway. Truly. I had 2 children. I had a mortgage. I had $214 in my checking account and a medical bill from the emergency room the night they called me to come identify my husband's body. I had a law degree that existed nowhere except in the dream I had abandoned when the children came. What I did not have was the money to fight Gerald Ashworth and Meridian Coverage Solutions in court. So I went back to work. I had been a licensed practical nurse before the children were born. I renewed my certification, took every shift the hospital would give me, and I raised my son and my daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment in Maryville, while the house Thomas and I had bought together went back to the bank. I worked nights for 6 years so I could be home when they got off the school bus. I learned to sleep in 4-hour increments. I drank too much coffee and not enough water, and I did not take a vacation for 11 years. I watched my son play Little League from the bleachers, still wearing my scrubs. I watched my daughter in the school play with my hair pinned up because I had come straight from a 12-hour shift and had not had time to change. I am not telling you this because I want your sympathy. I am telling you because I need you to understand exactly what was at stake in that banquet hall 30 years later. My son grew up to be a careful, serious man, the kind who reads contracts before he signs them and never misses a birthday. He went to the University of Tennessee on an academic scholarship, got his MBA, and spent the first decade of his career building a reputation in corporate finance that was, by the time he was 38, genuinely impressive. He called me every Sunday morning without fail. He flew me out for Christmas. When I had a scare with my blood pressure 2 years ago, he drove 4 hours to sit with me at my cardiologist appointment and take notes. I want to be clear about who my son is before I tell you the part that broke my heart. He had been working at Crestline Financial Group for 3 years when he told me about the promotion, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions. It was a significant jump, the kind of move that changes the trajectory of a career. He called me on a Sunday morning, the way he always did, and his voice had that particular quality it gets when he is trying to sound calm about something that is making him very happy. "They're throwing a dinner," he told me. "The whole senior leadership team. Mom, I want you to come. I want you there." I told him I would not miss it for the world. He emailed me the details. Black tie optional, which meant I needed to find something in the back of my closet or go shopping. And I went shopping because this was my son's night, and I was not going to show up in a dress I had worn to my neighbor's retirement party in 2019. I bought something in a deep burgundy that the woman at the department store told me made me look like someone who had opinions, which I took as a compliment. The dinner was at the Hargrove Room at the Knoxville Convention Center, a space I had driven past hundreds of times and never had a reason to enter. My son picked me up from my apartment, and he looked so much like his father in his dark suit that I had to look out the car window for a moment before I could say anything. I asked him to tell me about the people I would be meeting. He told me about his colleagues, his direct team, the CFO he admired. And then he told me about the company's chairman. The sound the world makes when it rearranges itself around you is not dramatic. It is very quiet. It is the sound of your own breathing. I asked my son to say the name again. He said it. Gerald Ashworth. I sat with my hands folded in my lap for what felt like a long time. The streetlights were moving past the car window. My son was talking about the downtown traffic, about a restaurant he wanted to take me to before I flew home. I heard his voice the way you hear a radio when you are thinking about something else. "Mom? You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Tell me more about the evening." I did not tell him then. I want to be honest about that, and I want to explain why, because the explanation matters. I had been carrying what I knew about Thomas's death for 30 years in a box that I kept very carefully closed, because the alternative opening it, looking at it, trying to do something about it with no money and no leverage and no one who would listen had seemed, for most of those years, like a way to destroy what was left of myself. I had chosen, instead, to survive. I had chosen my children. But I had not been entirely passive. That would not be accurate. In the years after Thomas died, I had collected things. A copy of the original incident report, obtained through a records request before I understood how thoroughly Meridian intended to fight me. A statement from one of the other workers on site that day, a man named Delbert Pruitt, who had seen Thomas's harness inspected by the site foreman that morning and found to be in correct working order. Delbert had been willing to talk, but he had not been willing to testify, because he had a family of his own and the construction industry in East Tennessee was not large. A series of internal emails, obtained through a source I will not name even now, that showed Meridian's claims department had been instructed to contest all scaffolding-related fatalities at Devereaux sites pending the outcome of a federal safety audit, an audit that had been quietly closed without findings after someone in the regional OSHA office retired. Unexpectedly, I had kept these documents in a manila folder in a fireproof lockbox under my bed for 29 years. I had shown them to 2 different attorneys over that time. Both had told me the same thing. The statute of limitations on the original claim had long passed, and while the documents were suggestive was not the same as actionable, and they were sorry for my loss. What I had not done, in all those years, was encounter Gerald Ashworth again. He had sold Meridian Coverage Solutions in 2003 for a number that made the local business news. He had founded Crestline Financial Group the following year. He had become, by any measure, a success. I spent the drive to the convention center very still and very quiet. And when my son parked the car and came around to open my door, I looked at his face in the parking garage light, and I made a decision. Not tonight. Let him have tonight. And I did. I walked into the Hargrove room on my son's arm, and I smiled at his colleagues, and I held a glass of sparkling water and made conversation about things I cannot remember now. The room was elegant. Round tables with white linens, low floral centerpieces, the kind of warm lighting that makes everyone look slightly better than they do in daylight, a small stage at the front with a podium. Gerald Ashworth was exactly as I remembered him, which was the most unsettling thing. 30 years had been kind to him in the superficial way that money is kind to people. He was tanned and well-dressed, and his hair had gone from silver-streaked to fully white in a way that looked distinguished rather than aged. He worked the room with the ease of a man who had been working rooms for a very long time. He shook hands, he laughed, he touched people lightly on the arm to indicate that he found them important. He did not recognize me. I had not expected him to. I was a widow in a kitchen in Maryville. I was one of hundreds. He came to our table. He shook my son's hand warmly and said things about potential and the future of the company, and then he turned to me with that same polished smile and said, "And you must be the famous mother I've been hearing about." "I am," I said. "Your son tells me you were a nurse for 30 years. I was. Remarkable. Selfless work." He said it the way people say things they don't mean fluently, without weight. "You must be very proud of the man he's become." "I am," I said again. I raised him by myself. His father died in a workplace accident when he was 9 years old. Something moved across Gerald Ashworth's face. Not recognition, not yet, but a small, reflexive flicker of discomfort, the way a person flinches at a noise before they know what made it. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. He moved on to the next table. I watched him go. My son put his hand on my arm. "You okay, Mom?" "I told you. I'm fine." What I had not told my son, what I had not told anyone, was that 6 months earlier I had received a phone call from a woman named Patricia Lund, a retired paralegal who had worked for 30 years at a firm that had, among its clients, Devereaux Construction. Patricia had found my name in an old file while she was cleaning out her storage unit. She had seen the incident report. She had seen the internal memo, not the one I had, but a different one I had never seen before, that showed, clearly and in writing, that the site foreman's inspection log for the day of Thomas's accident had been altered after the fact. Not by Thomas. By someone in Devereaux's risk management office, working in coordination with the claims department at Meridian Coverage Solutions. Patricia Lund had given me a copy of that memo. She had also given me the name of a journalist at the Knoxville Sentinel who had been looking into Meridian's claims practices for the better part of a year, following a pattern of similar denials in scaffolding fatalities across 3 states. I had spent 6 months working with that journalist, quietly, carefully. I had given him Delbert Pruitt's statement. I had given him my documents. I had given him Patricia Lund. He had found 2 other families in similar situations, both with surviving documentation that corroborated what mine showed. The story was scheduled to publish the following Monday. I had not originally planned to say anything at the dinner. I had planned to sit with my son on the night he celebrated his promotion, and I had planned to let the story run on Monday and let the professional consequences for Gerald Ashworth follow from there. I had not planned to do anything in that banquet hall. But then Gerald Ashworth walked to the podium, and he told a story. He talked about building Crestline from nothing. He talked about the early days, the risk, the faith it required to start something new. He talked about integrity. He used that word. He said that the culture he had built at Crestline was one where people could trust each other, where a handshake meant something, where the company stood behind the people who worked for it. And then he looked out at the room and he said, "Success means nothing if it isn't built on honesty." I looked at my son. He was looking at the podium. His face was open and attentive, the way it had been when he was a boy and someone was telling him something he believed. I looked back at the podium, at the man standing behind it, at the white hair and the monogrammed cufflinks, different pair, same affectation, and the smile that hadn't changed in 30 years. I reached into my bag. The folder was not thick. 22 pages, including Patricia Lund's memo and the journalist's preliminary findings, which he had shared with me as a professional courtesy while the final story was being edited. I had brought it to the dinner not because I had intended to use it, but because I had been carrying some version of it with me for 30 years, and not carrying it had stopped feeling like an option. I stood up. Dining rooms have a particular acoustic quality. When one person stands at a table in a quiet moment, it draws the eye faster than you would expect. I was aware of people turning to look at me. I was aware of my son's head turning. I was aware of the silence that happens when a room senses that something is about to occur. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said. My voice was steady. I had not been sure it would be, but it was. "My name is Margaret Calloway. I'm Andrew's mother. I'm also the widow of Thomas Calloway, who died on September 14, 1994, on a Devereaux construction site on Route 9 outside of Knoxville, when a scaffolding system collapsed because the harness inspection protocols required by federal safety code had not been followed." The room was very quiet. Gerald Ashworth had stopped smiling. "The insurance carrier that denied our claim," I said, "was Meridian Coverage Solutions. The regional director who sat at my kitchen table 3 weeks after my husband's funeral and told me that Thomas had violated safety protocol and that we were not entitled to full wrongful death benefits was the man standing at that podium, Gerald Ashworth. Someone at the table nearest the stage made a sound. My son said my name. I did not sit down. I was 32 years old. I had 2 children. I did not have the resources to fight a determination that was based, I can now demonstrate, on a site foreman's inspection log that was altered after the fact, in coordination between Devereaux's Risk Management Office and Meridian's Claims Department, to shift liability away from both companies and onto my dead husband. I set the folder on the table. I opened it. I did not need to read from it. I knew what it said. This folder contains the original inspection log, a copy of the altered version submitted to the claims adjuster, a sworn statement from a witness present on the morning of the accident who confirmed the original harness inspection, and an internal memorandum from Meridian Coverage Solutions dated 10 days after my husband's death, instructing the claims department to, and I am quoting directly, pursue all available documentation to support an employee violation finding in the Devereaux scaffold events. My son said my name again. His voice was different now. It was not the voice of someone asking me to stop. It was the voice of someone who had just understood something he had not understood before. Events, I said. Plural, because Thomas was not the only one. There were others. 3 other families in 3 other states with scaffolding fatalities on Devereaux sites in that same 18-month window, all of them denied on similar grounds, all of them with similar anomalies in the supporting documentation. A journalist at the Knoxville Sentinel has been investigating those cases for the past year. His story publishes Monday. I looked at Gerald Ashworth. He was gripping the edge of the podium. His knuckles were the color of the tablecloths. I came here tonight because my son invited me to celebrate the proudest moment of his professional life, and I am proud of him. I am prouder of him than I have words for. I also came here tonight because I have been waiting 30 years to be in the same room as the man who looked me in the eye and told me my husband died because of something he did wrong, knowing that was a lie, knowing that it was a lie that he and his company constructed deliberately to protect their financial interests, and I decided tonight that I was not going to leave without saying so. I closed the folder. I'm sorry for the interruption, I said. Andrew, sweetheart, I'm going to step outside for some air. Don't let this ruin your evening. You earned this. I picked up my bag. I walked through the banquet hall, and I want to be honest, my legs were not entirely steady, and I kept my eyes on the door because I did not trust myself to look sideways. The room was so quiet that I could hear the soft sound of my own shoes on the floor. No one spoke until I had almost reached the exit, and then I heard Gerald Ashworth's voice from the podium, and it had lost its polish entirely. That woman is those allegations are completely without. Mr. Ashworth. A voice from one of the center tables, calm and authoritative. I paused with my hand on the door. I recognized the voice. It belonged to Crestline's CFO, a man my son had spoken about with particular respect. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. I walked out. The lobby of the convention center was bright and nearly empty. I found a bench near a large window that looked out at the parking garage, and I sat down, and I put the folder on my lap, and I breathed. My son came out 7 minutes later. I know it was 7 minutes because I had been watching the clock on my phone, not for any particular reason except that I needed something to look at. He sat down next to me. He was quiet for a moment. How long have you known he was chairman? He asked. Since you told me in the car. You went in there anyway. I went in there for you. I was going to stay quiet. And then he gave that speech. My son leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he has done since he was a teenager when he is working something out. His father used to do the same thing. It still catches me off guard. The folder, he said. You brought it with you. I've been carrying some version of it for 30 years. He was quiet again. Then he said, Why didn't you tell me? Any of it. When I told you who the chairman was, why didn't you say something then? I thought about how to answer that. I had spent the past months thinking about the right moment, the right way, the question of whether there was ever a right way to tell your child that the life you built together, the apartment, the night shifts, the Little League games in scrubs, all of it had been made necessary by something that did not have to happen. I didn't want the first thing you heard about Gerald Ashworth to be what I knew about him, I said. Not on your night. Not before you'd had any time to think. But you were going to let Monday happen. The article, without telling me, I was going to tell you this weekend. Before it ran, he looked at me. I looked back at him. He had his father's eyes, not the color, but the quality of them, the directness. Okay, he said finally. Okay? I mean, Mom, I need some time to process this. Obviously. But okay, he exhaled. The folder. Can I read it? I handed it to him. He read it there on the bench in the convention center lobby while I watched the parking garage and thought about Thomas, about September of 1994, about a kitchen table and monogrammed cufflinks and the sound of a man's voice being sorry in a way that cost him nothing. My son read every page. He was meticulous about it, the way he is meticulous about everything. When he finished, he set it carefully on his knee and looked at the window. Delbert Pruitt, he said. Is he still alive? He is. He's 79. He talked to the journalist last month. And the other families? A woman in Georgia, a man in Ohio. His wife handled everything after he passed. He nodded slowly. He handed the folder back to me. Inside the Hargrove room, I could hear the muffled sound of voices, movement, the particular acoustic signature of a formal gathering that had become something else. I heard the word legal floating through the closed doors, disconnected from its sentence. I should probably go back in, my son said. You don't have to. I want to. These are my colleagues. They deserve a real explanation from me, not just, he stopped. Mom, you know this might affect my position. I know. And you still did it. Your position at a company whose chairman built his career on what I just described is not a position I can want for you with a clean conscience. I looked at him. But it's your life and your career, and whatever you decide to do with this information is your decision. I am not telling you what to do. I never have. He almost smiled at that. It was a complicated almost smile, the kind that carries a lot of things in it simultaneously. You worked nights for 6 years, he said. I did. So that I could be home when we got off the bus. You and your sister? Yes. I always knew that. He stopped again. I didn't know the whole shape of it. Does that make sense? I knew we were tight on money and I knew you worked hard and I knew why Dad wasn't there. I didn't know about the folder. I didn't know about the altered logs. I know you didn't. Why? Why keep it from us? It was the question I had expected. I had been asking it to myself for 30 years in the small hours of the night when the apartment was quiet and the children were asleep, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee in the manila folder and the weight of something I did not know what to do with. Because you were 9, I said. And then you were 12. And then you were 16, and I had watched what anger does to boys that age who have a specific person to aim it at, and I could not give you that. I could not give you a target, and then watch what happened. I paused. And then you were an adult, and you were building something. And I told myself that when the time was right, I would tell you. I told myself that for a long time. And the time became tonight. The time became tonight. He stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He looked toward the doors of the Hargrove room, and then he looked back at me. Come back in with me, he said. Andrew. Mom. He extended his hand. Come back in. Sit at our table. You're not going to wait in the lobby while I deal with whatever is happening in there. I looked at his hand. I thought about Thomas, who had wide hands made for carrying things. I took my son's hand and we walked back into the Hargrove room together. What we found was not the chaos I had half expected. Gerald Ashworth was not at the podium. He was at the far end of the room, in conversation with 2 men I did not recognize and a woman who had the bearing of someone from Crestline's legal department. The rest of the room had regrouped into small clusters, the way people do when they are processing something and do not yet have the language for it. My son's colleagues came to him. They did not avoid him or look at him with calculation. They came to him. One of them, a man about my son's age who had been seated at our table, put his hand briefly on my son's shoulder and said something quiet that I was not close enough to hear. My son nodded. The CFO crossed the room and stopped in front of me. Mrs. Calloway, he said, I want you to know that what you shared tonight is being taken seriously. I can't make you any promises about process or outcome, but I can tell you that it will not be dismissed. I don't need promises, I said. The journalist has everything I have and more. Monday will take care of itself. He nodded. There was something in his expression that was not quite an apology and not quite an endorsement, but was perhaps the most honest thing a man in his position could offer. which is the look of someone who recognizes a weight they did not know they had been carrying alongside someone else. The story ran on Monday. It ran on the front page of the Knoxville Sentinel's website, and it was picked up by the AP by noon. By Wednesday, there were 2 attorneys who had filed suit on behalf of the Ohio and Georgia families, citing the documentation the journalist had published. By the following Monday, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had announced they were reviewing the original incident reports from the Devereaux scaffold cases from 1993 to 1996. Gerald Ashworth stepped down from the chairmanship of Crestline Financial Group on the Wednesday of that second week, citing what a press release described as a desire to address personal matters. The press release did not describe the personal matters. My son kept his position. His colleagues, it turned out, were not people who punished a man for his mother's honesty. The CFO restructured his role slightly, moving him away from any accounts that might create the appearance of conflict, but the title stood and the promotion stood. He drove to Maryville that Friday evening, the first Friday after the story ran. He brought his daughter, my granddaughter, who is 7 years old and who is very serious about her opinions, which she has many of. She showed me a drawing she had made at school that week, a picture of our family, which she had labeled in large letters at the bottom. My granddaughter cannot spell grandmother yet, and so the label said Grandma. I put it on my refrigerator. We ate dinner at my kitchen table, the 3 of us, and after my granddaughter fell asleep on my couch watching a movie, my son and I sat with our coffee and talked for a long time. We talked about his father, the stories I had told him and the ones I hadn't. We talked about the night shifts. We talked about the Little League games. We talked about the apartment in Maryville and the house that went back to the bank and the years that followed, and my son listened the way he had learned to listen, with his full attention, without interrupting, with the patience of someone who understands that some things cannot be rushed. Near midnight, he said something I have thought about every day since. "You never seemed angry," he said. "Not when we were growing up. I never saw you angry about it." "I was angry," I said. "I just decided early on that the anger could be fuel or it could be a fire. One of those is useful and one of them burns everything down." He was quiet for a moment. "The folder," he said. "You kept it under your bed for 29 years. "Yes." "And you brought it to the dinner." "Yes." "In your bag. In your burgundy dress." "Yes." He looked at me across the kitchen table, and he smiled. And it was such a specific smile, his father's mouth, my stubbornness, 30 years of something I could finally set down, that I had to look away for a moment. "I have to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "In the lobby, after. You said it was your life and your decision about what to do with the information, and you said you'd never told me what to do." "That's true. But Mom, you went in there anyway." "I did. You went in there knowing it might cost me something." "Yes," I said. "I did. And I will tell you honestly that there is not a version of that evening in which I make a different choice, because there was not a version of that evening in which I was going to sit across the table from Gerald Ashworth and let him tell 140 people that he had built his life on honesty. I looked at my son. "If that cost you something, you had every right to be furious with me. Are you telling me I should have been?" "I'm telling you I would have understood it." He picked up his coffee cup. He looked at it. He put it down. "He told you Dad died wrong," he said quietly. "He sat in our kitchen and told you that, and then he went back to work." "Yes." "And built a whole other company." "Yes." My son nodded. He was quiet for a long time. "I'm not furious with you," he said finally. "I want you to know that. I needed to tell you that." We sat there in my kitchen in Maryville for another hour, and the coffee went cold, and my granddaughter made a small sound in her sleep from the couch in the next room, and the clock on the wall made the sound it has made in every apartment I have lived in since 1994, steady and indifferent and ongoing. I am 62 years old. I worked nights for 6 years. I learned to sleep in 4-hour increments and drink too much coffee and not enough water, and I raised 2 children in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I kept a folder in a fireproof lockbox under my bed for 29 years, because I did not know what else to do with the truth except keep it somewhere safe until the moment came when I could do something with it that would not simply destroy what I had built. The moment came, I was wearing burgundy and I was sitting at a white tablecloth and the champagne glass was catching the chandelier light and Gerald Ashworth was smiling that polished smile. And after 30 years the moment came and I was ready for it. Thomas had wide hands. He laughed too loud at his own jokes. He smelled like sawdust in Irish spring. He deserved the truth. Even 30 years late. We all did.